Table mic test, testing table mic 1, 2, 3, table mic 1, 2, 3. Standing mic 1, 2, 3, standing mic 1, 2, 3. Mic 1, 1, 2, 3, mic 1, testing mic 1. Mic 1 test 1, 2, 3, mic 1, mic 1 test 1, 2, 3. Mic 1, 1, 2, 3, mic 1, testing mic 1, mic 1, 1, 2, 3. Mic 2, 1, 2, 3, mic 2, mic 2, testing mic 2. Mic 3, 1, 2, 3, mic 3, mic 3, 1, 2, 3, mic 3. Mic 4, testing mic 4, mic 4, testing mic 4. Mic 5, 1, 2, 3, mic 5, mic 5, 1, 2, 3, mic 5. Mic 6, 1, 2, 3, mic 6, mic 6, 1, 2, 3, mic 6. Seven, 1, 2, 3, mic 7, mic 7, 1, 2, 3, mic 7. Mic 8, testing mic 8, 1, 2, 3, mic 8. Mic 9, testing mic 9, mic 9, 1, 2, 3, mic 9.
Scoot in further. Please stop it.
Table mic, just to double check. Table mic 1, 2, 3, table mic 1, 2, 3. Standing mic 1, 2, 3, standing mic 1, 2, 3.
Remote participant test, 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 remote participant test, 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 test. Great.
To order. Do we need to review Zoom procedures? Mike?
I think we're good.
Okay. So approval of the agenda, and I would just note that, for number 5, when we review the interim zoning changes, we're obviously going to prioritize what Mike has presented to us, but if we have time, we can discuss some of the other items. And I believe Tim is going to do a little presentation on slopes to start us off. Okay, great. Does anyone want to move approval of the agenda?
I'll move to approve the agenda.
I'll second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. So comments from the chair, I just have 2 things. Maria and I were talking a little bit last week about, not only focusing on how the zoning can assist housing production in the city, but, and correct me if I'm mischaracterizing anything we talked about, but also how we can support our downtown businesses and also support homeowners who were affected by the flood or redevelopment of places that were affected by the flood. So just wanting to note that as a theme going forward. And Mike, I don't know if you have any updates on what's going on with I'll let you finish writing.
Oh, no.
I know we talked about some of the FEMA buyouts previously, and I know there's been some obviously issues with FEMA money, but I was wondering if you could give us an update on any of the flooded properties in the city and what's going on with them.
All right, so we did get, we put in funding for 3 buyouts, and we had put in requests for, well, the initial for building elevations was initially requested for all of the buildings. So the initial request that went into the legislature last year was for $3 million, with 1.5 of that, 1.5 million to go to the city, and 1.5 to go to Berry City. And they split it throughout the state. So we got 900,000. So we're elevating 3 buildings and we're buying out 3 buildings. And on the buyouts front, we have all of them approved, and they are in process of getting to closing. So we're hoping those, I mean, you just don't know. It's FEMA under the Trump administration, so you just don't know. But the hope is that it's at a point where they're going to work its way through. They're going to be approved. It's a question, how long is it going to take for it to get through? But we're hoping very soon those will be done. The elevations, we have the 900,000, that's state money, so we don't have to worry about losing any of that money. So we are working through the process of doing the design work right now. And the last I heard, these were projects that were all run by Josh, who's no longer in my office. Chris Lumbra has taken over the building elevations portion, and he is, they've got contracts with engineers and architects to design the building elevations, with hopes of doing at least 2 of the building elevations this fall before winter.
Okay.
And the last one, if we don't get all 3 done this fall, then one will be next spring after we get through the winter.
So the buildings that receive the FEMA buyout, will they be demolished?
Yes, they have to
Part
be.
of the,
Yep, have to be with a perpetual no build on those properties.
are they on Elm Street or State Street?
1 on Elm and 2 on State.
Okay.
2 on Lower State. Yep.
And how were the buildings selected that were to be elevated?
We scored them based on their elevation with respect to the base flood elevation. So basically how far below, how much water in a 100-year event and a 1% event is in there. And those that had the most,
Okay.
the deepest in, were rated the highest and worked their way back. So
Okay. Did other people want that, but
Yes,
qualify?
we have others that would be interested. We have 6 properties that were interested in elevations.
Mm,
And we only had funding for 3. So
okay,
we still hope at some point, maybe if some of that funding isn't used, that maybe there'll be a second round, but we'll just have to wait and see if there'll be a second round of funding for those.
Okay.
And on a separate note, I just wanted to mention that I'm going to be leaving a little bit early tonight. I'm going to be going over to another meeting. And so I'll be leaving about 7:50 or 6:55. So
Okay,
I can be over there for the 7 o'clock meeting.
okay. All right. So I guess I was also just gonna note that I think we're all aware of what the city council's been doing, but I watched some of those meetings and they're gonna consider it, I think. The city plan, I mean, they're gonna consider it again this Wednesday and passing it, and then it will come back to us at our next meeting. Is that?
They will be voting changes on Wednesday. So that's the schedules. They're going to vote changes on Wednesday. We will integrate those changes Thursday, Friday, and early next week. When that's ready, it'll be on your next agenda to review and approve those changes. And then all of the pieces will all be in place for 15-day notice warnings for the Regional Planning Commission and the city to adopt. So on the RPC regional review, they'll have the final draft instead of having to do it in 2 steps. By waiting until after we make those changes, they'll do it in 1 step instead. And that'll be July 8th at 5 o'clock. They'll have the committee. There's a committee, a regional plan review, municipal plan review committee, and they will meet at 5 o'clock on that night. And then later that night, starting at 6:30, is the full Board of Commissioners that will take the recommendation from that committee and make the recommendation for regional approval on condition that City Council, because City Council will meet July 9th, the next night on Wednesday. So then council can adopt it on the 9th and it'll be regionally approved at that time. So that's the reason for pushing it out is just to make sure that there's a full 15-day warning with completed drafts. So they're going to vote changes. We can make all the changes, incorporate them all into the documents, and then we can rewarn those 2 meetings. So there will be a council meeting on June 20-something, 25th. I don't have it in front of me, but later in June, there's another council meeting, but the city plan won't be on that agenda.
Right.
Because there isn't enough time to make the changes, get it warned and beyond. So that's the schedule for the city plan.
Okay, thank you for reviewing that. Anyone have any questions? Any counselors? And I am not going to be able to make the 4th Monday, I think it is the 23rd. So I don't know. It's totally fine to meet without me. But I just wanted to note that. But if enough of you, the rest of you are here, I think that should be fine. And Mike is willing to just facilitate the meeting. Okay, I don't hear anyone saying they're going to miss the meeting, so let's just plan to do that. Okay, general business comments, something not on the agenda.
Peter has his hand up.
Oh, okay, Peter?
I have 2 questions, and depending on the answers, I might want to talk about it now. Mike is leaving early. On the agenda is his letter regarding the Housing Committee resignations. Is that going to be discussed before he leaves the meeting? I think it should be. I attended the last meeting. It was on the agenda. You never got to it. So that's my first question.
Okay. I mean, I would say that I hope that we would get to it, but I would
Well,
say
why don't you
we're gonna
consider doing it first?
work on the zoning changes.
Why don't you consider doing?
I don't
Mike
have a
first?
strong opinion about that. Does somebody else want to move a change in the agenda? Put that first, or should we just keep the agenda as it is?
Just keep moving.
Okay.
We get to it,
Okay. All right.
ideally. I'm sorry, Mike, what time did you say you had to leave again?
6:55, so
Okay.
about a half an hour early.
All right, my other question is, Mike, regarding the elevations and buyouts, do you have any information about what the state intends to do with their own flooded buildings? I mean, driving down State Street or up State Street, whatever, it's pretty depressing. A bunch of state buildings are just shuttered. What's the plan?
I don't know what the state's plan is. I know there was a bill to discuss what to do with a lot of the vacant buildings. A lot of this doesn't necessarily have to do with the flood because some of it is just from the post-pandemic. There's a lot of remote work and a lot less people in town. And so BGS was supposed to be working on some plans, but I haven't been privy to any information of what they're doing, other than there was a bill to try to discuss disposing of some of the property. But I don't even know if that bill passed or not.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna make a comment now because it's related to this. You know, I've lived in and around Montpelier off and on since the early 70s. And I've seen colleges come and go. I've seen NECI, Vermont College for the Fine Arts. Before that, number of iterations. I've seen state buildings come and go. Since the flood, of course, it's worse. We are the state capital, but we are also our own town. I really think that the Planning Commission and the Planning Department needs to be more engaged than they apparently have been when these large and important properties for the character of our town slip through our hands, and God knows, oh, well, I don't know. We don't know what they're planning. We should know what they're planning. We should know what they're not planning. We should be in discussions with them. We should have been in discussions with NEC. I know we talked to them and they said blah, blah, blah. Same thing for this, same thing for the college, but they lied. They lied about what their intents were. We need to have more control, or at least more respectful interaction with these entities, especially the state. It's something I think you guys need to think about, in my opinion. Thank you.
Steve Whitaker. I would suggest that y'all go and look at the recording and the minutes from December 20th of 2017, because apparently we aren't operating under a legally adopted plan currently, and therefore we don't have the right to be amending the bylaws even on an interim basis, because those amendments were drastically revised by the city council and never put back to a public hearing, which is required by law. And nobody noticed. So the fact that this same scenario is playing out now and most of y'all are either complacent or unaware of it is really troubling, because it appears to be by design, not accidental, that we do this half-assed planning process and then rework it in the city council and then rush and compact everything into our, regional adoption before anybody can catch up to it. But I caught up to it that we didn't hold public hearings after the city council revised the plan back in 17. So that makes it really questionably whether we're even operating under a currently legal plan or whether we have the right to adopt zoning bylaw changes on an interim basis. But this, I've reviewed briefly the memo, and I think it's atrocious that y'all would think to push it off onto another agenda again. It's full of fluff and blame it on the housing committee. But I've talked to 6 different committees and members and who feel disenfranchised from this process and who don't feel that their input has been heard and incorporated into this plan. That's Housing Committee, Conservation Commission, Complete Streets, Transportation, Homelessness, and me and Kim representing the remnant piece parts of the Public Safety Authority. So this assertion that, oh, we've fully engaged with all these city committees is BS. It's absolutely BS. You have not. You have allowed Mike to write your stuff and you have rubber stamped it and you have left out most of the public engagement, which is required by law. And so now this big rush is on to get the growth center. We're not going to get the growth center. Even the actions, in fact, it's not even on your agenda to review the proposed changes to the plan that are proposed for Wednesday night. How can that be? How can the planning commission, and then that comes back to you, not for a vote or approval. It comes back to be reviewed by, you don't get a vote. This way this process works is once they change it, it comes back here for review. You don't get a vote. You are disenfranchised from the process for what you didn't do prior. So I'm, and others are recommending that this whole plan be rejected either at the regional level or at the city level and sent back to y'all to do your damn work. Some of the things that the visitor center is a core piece that the business community wants, that was in our federal grant for federal application to fund the transit center. And that big empty lobby is underutilized and has bathrooms, and no mention of turning that into a visitor center or keeping it open. Regional dispatch, you've heard more than enough about, but done jack shiest. And the Capitol complex overall, repurposing parking lots, etc. What I believe you're seeing and what you've unwittingly become a participants in is a shell game, a scam. And it's remiss of the planning commission to have not seen this, reviewed what happened in 17. It's true, none of y'all were on the commission then, but Mike was here. And that's the common theme. This is an MO and y'all need to cut through it. We need to get rid of Mike. We need to get rid of Frazier. We need to get this planning commission staffed up and engaged and familiar with the law on planning requirements, citizen participation requirements, capital budget requirements. Y'all are blissfully going along with thinking you're going to get away with it. You're not, we're not going to get the growth center this year. So we would be better use of our time rather than heading down that, primrose path for y'all to ask the council to refer the plan back to you, to not approve it, and to refer it back to you. And then you dig into the details of what's missing and what needs to be put in there. Because inevitably it's going to blow back on you when it blows up further up the chain. So you would be better served and you'd be better serving the public by addressing all those people who feel disenfranchised, all those public input sessions where there was no chapter ready to be reviewed or discussed. It was a farce. Y'all ran a charade here, and I don't think it's a malicious intent. I think it's who you choose to follow rather than lead.
Thank you for your perspective, Stephen. All right. We're gonna move on to the zoning changes. Do we have? Oh.
General business ordinance.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. He was the only other
Okay.
person from the public, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So should we start with Mike or with your presentation, Tim, or what?
I don't know. I feel like we've got a lot to get through, and maybe not start with the presentation.
Okay,
first.
yeah, maybe Mike, you can just, or Meredith, you can briefly
Yeah, so actually, I'll lead through this portion, but really Meredith knows as much about this as I do because she did most of the work on this. So for people who don't know Meredith, Meredith, what's that? Yeah. Meredith is our planning and zoning administrator. And so she has been working with the city and basically enforcing and administering the zoning regulations for 6 years, 7? 7 now. All right.
7 May.
So she's very familiar with this. And so we took the directive that we had, I believe we were supposed to look at. Now I'm going to try to get myself caught up here. Slopes, major site plan, subdivision, and sketch plan. So I think there were 2 that were related to that. So those were the 4 that we jumped into to try to go in, really try to get some quick, clean things. And you'll see there's a lot of strikeouts because not everything always, you think, oh, we just do this. It's like, well, there's always ramifications and we've got to go through and split out a few things. So we did go through, just going in order of what's in the text. So the steep slopes, what we were really trying to target was the fact that at the steepest slopes, it's basically as a number of 0. So everything that exceeds something has to go to the DRB and has to have the engineering. And so this was to try to go and set up some things. I believe we set this up as an out, and correct me if I'm wrong. This had the out right at applicability. So if something was less than 50 square feet and not associated with a building, then the provisions don't apply. So the way ordinances work, the proper way of organizing things is you usually have a layer, think of it a layer cake. You've got, it has to fall into the first, well, or think of it as like a cascade. It has to fall in the first bucket to get to the second bucket. So in applicability, we've got the opportunity to go and cut things right off and it doesn't have to go through it all. So, and that's what we did is we said, if it's less than 50 square feet, then that'll start to get a lot of these small projects out, a set of staircases that's going up a steep slope. Right now, we've got to have those go through regulations. The qualifier we had in there associated with a building is because we didn't want people to use that as an opportunity. Our main purpose for having these rules is to make sure that buildings and structures either at the top or at the bottom of a slope are going to be safe. So the one thing we didn't want to do is start making exceptions and have people start encroaching buildings onto the steep slopes. You can still do it. No one says you can't. You just have to have the foundations be engineered. So that was where the short version of that, and I think we'll have some better, longer, bigger discussions when we get to the full rewrite. But for the quick, how can we get a couple of quick wins? That would be our quick win. And we chose 50 square feet, just 50 square feet. If people think a bigger number is better. I guess let's talk about the one at a time.
I think that was where we had we're not engineers, right? So it's like, we don't know what the right amount of disturbance is. I mean, where'd the 50 square feet? Did you guys talk to Kurt and team and say what's reasonable, or did we just start and say, hey, let's just do something modest?
Well, we put in we just chose the 50 square feet because it's a small amount. That is probably what we would call the minimus. We certainly could make that number bigger if people felt it needed to be bigger. What we're trying to look at, like we said, are these smaller projects, a little bit of retaining wall. Either you're making a steep slope or you're impacting a steep slope in either case. In some cases, once you get into the regulations, you end up falling out because, oh, okay, I'm in here, but I'm only clearing, I'm not building on the steep slope, and I'm clearing less than the amount. So therefore, I don't, once you're in, you might end up not needing to meet requirements, but this boots out some small stuff right at the start.
I'm feeling like 50 square feet is very small. So where disturbance, land clearing, or creation of steep slopes is less than 50 square feet is not associated with building, the provisions of this section do not apply. 50 square feet is basically 7 feet by 7 feet. It's a very, very small disturbance. Yeah, like a teeny tiny stoop patio. So, I don't know if that would, I'm not sure. I think it might include something like stairs, but that would be kind of it completely, I would say. So that's feeling like a good change, but maybe too small.
Okay.
So I just want to get a little bit into the finer points of this.
Yeah.
So this clause, the way I read it and the way the commas are, is that it is not saying that the entire project is only 50 square feet,
Yeah.
right? It's the disturbance of steep slopes.
Yeah.
So say slopes of 30% or more. That area of disturbance is only, then what it'll mean is slopes of 15% or more. So what I've run into is times where somebody's building a house and there is a tiny amount of ditching that they've done around the house, or they
Yeah.
had to push a tiny bit of a bank back and put in a retaining wall. And it's not actually attached to the house, maybe. It's near the house, but it's not actually under the house. It's a ditch. It's a swale, but it triggers my having to bring in an engineered plan and sometimes go to DRB.
Right.
Because the slopes being created or disturbed are technically at 30% or more.
Yeah.
And so what, yes, we're trying to capture things like stairs. Like I have somebody trying to put in new stairs on Northfield Street to get from their house down to the sidewalk versus having to walk down their steep driveway.
Sure.
Right. So that's one kind of project, but it's also these other aspects. So we just picked 50 square feet. There
Yeah.
wasn't a whole lot of time to go back and forth with DPW. So if, we could start here and then over the next year, get more information to try and expand that where it seemed within reason. Because I also, being the person who's going to be approving these without engineered plans or the DRB necessarily, if you start going too far down there, when if it's a big area and you're talking a steep swale going down,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's trying to find a balancing act. So I'm, it's your choice, but
I have a
it's,
question about when. Is the engineered plan always required and is DRB always required in steep slopes? Like
No.
when, okay. so
there's,
what is that?
I don't think we don't have
I
the
have
whole
it up
thing
on
here.
my
There's
computer.
in section 3007.
Yeah.
Give me a second and I can pull up the whole thing. If you give me a minute and I can share my screen so it's up there. There's a whole matrix chart to decide when something has to get an engineered plan and when it has to have DRB review. And the engineered plan comes first.
Page 317.
Yep.
Okay, so at 4,000 square feet, you can get by with just an engineered plan, but 8,000 square feet requires a hearing
Of a
of
certain,
like 15% or more.
yeah.
What would happen in a hearing?
The development review board,
Right,
the
right.
panel of 7 reviews. I mean, one, what that means, it adds in all the neighbors get a public notice of the hearing, right? So all the neighbors come in, and get to comment on all of it before a permit is issued, right? If it's an administrative permit, then I issue the permit with the engineered plan as my input and consultation with Department of Public Works. Neighbors don't get notice until after the permit is issued and the notice is posting of the notice on the property. There's no direct mailings. So it's really, once you go to that DRB, the higher standard for slopes is you have a panel, not just me. So they start looking at the slopes standards, which are in this regulation with more care, right? And all the neighbors get notice ahead of time to be able to submit all of their comments as well.
I mean, is the idea that there would be, because the basis for this zoning regulation is safety, like Mike was saying.
Mhm.
What, would there be a safety issue that a neighbor would be aware of that an engineer would not be aware of?
Maybe not necessarily a safety issue, but the standards, the design standards under subsection H, right above those figures, bring in some other elements like preserving distinctive natural features, and consideration of a broader consideration of stormwater issues, which the stormwater standards might not have been triggered by the project. But once you get into these standards that the board has to apply, they can consider stormwater. And I have had that happen where neighbors have come up and said, hey, we're downhill from this project. We have issues already with stormwater. You're talking about allowing additional impervious surface up here. And it triggers the board laying on additional conditions that wouldn't necessarily apply if it were an administrative approval.
Do the engineering plans talk about stormwater runoff? Or is it just
So
that one property?
So an engineered plan and report needs to include drainage and swale information, foundation and retaining wall designs if applicable, information about existing and proposed grades, and statements from the engineer about the safety. So drainage and swale information goes into that engineered report. And if we know that they're headed towards DRB as well, we ask them to address all the standards and those design standards.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm struggling with why. If it's safe, if an engineer has signed off on it, I struggle with why neighbors need to have a public hearing. It seems like, I don't know, how do you? what do
Yeah,
you
I had the same reaction, but then I will say that I have experience. I do know of situations in which stormwater,
Hmm.
on a certain parcel is not, the person who's developing that parcel is not always aware of how the stormwater will move in other areas of the neighborhood. So I don't know, personally, I
Yeah.
hadn't thought of that before, and I feel like there's some value in that, but I guess that's, I'm not sure what a neighbor would have to say about preserving natural features. That doesn't resonate because I can't think of a good example, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, sometimes there are ridges or slopes between properties where if you're suddenly taking that away unnecessarily, or, however, for whatever reason, there are times when neighbors have issues with that. But it's also when you start taking away the existing natural slopes and trees and that are there that are holding everything together, depending on what you have for soils underneath, it can change everything around it. So it is a balancing act, right? We had a whole issue shortly after I came on in 2018 with these slopes regulations, because at that point, nothing could be done at all at 30% or greater slopes. That means you can't even move a retaining wall back, 2 feet, because you've now created a new 30% slope, something that's super steep. So we had to go through and have the board look at lots of projects that probably shouldn't have gone to them to lay in their own practical sort of override of the regulations until we could get those regulations fixed. Because there were a ton of things that I couldn't approve that were, I couldn't approve a ditch.
I know, well, it's just, 15% is, like, we live in a hilly city. So pretty much like any construction would have to go, wouldn't it? Well, I guess.
If you look at
You have to go above the 4,000 square
yeah,
feet.
almost nothing. I haven't had, no, it's for what I have sent through in the last 7 years, it's once you start impacting the 25% and 30% slopes. And it has to be, still quite a lot. You're talking definitely the much bigger projects, like big full developments.
Right.
Did you have you want to make a comment, James?
I'd love to add a little color on this, because I don't think that's the way it necessarily plays out. That it's only the big projects that are impacted. We have a site that is 0.4 acres. We're looking to build a quadplex on it. There was grading done. They dug a foundation hole, they filled it back in. There's literally, it's like a few square meters or something like that of steep slopes that are in the new building footprint that are now putting us into the DRB. And it's not insignificant to go to the DRB, because this is exactly what you all have been talking about, is if you look at the standards, then once you go to the DRB, the amount of things that a neighbor can then say, well, this is supposed to minimize the number of, the size of a building, and that building isn't minimized, or this is supposed to X, Y, or Z, or A, B, and C. So it really opens the door wide open for any kind of objection. And my understanding is that Montpelier's, the way that we map our steep slopes is different than the way that some other towns around us map steep slopes. And therefore, little tiny pockets get pulled into this over 30. And I do think that there are ways to adjust that aren't a full rewrite, but that could get rid of these little tiny pockets, pulling everything into the steep slopes. I would agree that like the over 15 isn't nearly as impactful, but it's also, these are not the slopes that we really care about. We care about like big 30-degree slopes. Then let's look for where the big 30-degree slopes are. Because right now, the way the rules are read and the way that the map is made, we're not looking just at big 30-degree slopes. We're looking at every tiny 1 meter of steep slope in the city. And I think you guys could adjust that tonight and make a huge impact.
So my presentation is relevant
Yes,
to,
I was just
to
gonna
that.
say, let's.
I don't know how to go about
But
doing that.
you'd have to share. I don't know if Peter's got his hand up. I don't know if we
Okay.
wanted to address Peter first.
Let's do that. Yeah.
Go ahead, Peter.
I think he's trying to unmute while I'm asking him to unmute, and so it's not working. Mike, can you try?
Okay, thanks. I just want to add to what James said, because I'm not sure the person who was asking, I don't know who was asking the questions earlier. The problem with having to end up at the DRB, even with a small project, is it's license for neighbors to object not just to the slopes, but to everything. I mean, I went through this. I had again, a slope which would have been fixed by this little fix. It was small, probably, 5 feet wide or something like that. But I had to have an engineering report and blah, 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 blah. And we get in there and, neighbors who didn't want us to do the extension that we were doing objected to a million different things. That's what slows down. That's what stops people from building. And so anything you can do to give Meredith or whoever the zoning director is more expert leeway to make a ruling so that it doesn't go before the DRB would be a major and important change. I really urge you, not just on this slope matter, but everything. I saw a suggestion that Gabe made about changing zoning designations. Anything that you can do to simplify it, you should do. I really hope you will. Thank you.
Should I join the Zoom meeting? Do you want to pull up the presentation? What's the easiest?
Are you already?
I don't have
Oh, you're
whatever
not in it.
presentation it is.
I sent it to the.
We just
Ah.
did that.
Oh, okay.
So
Sorry.
just tell, yeah,
I can open it. And then I would need to Go back
Some
and
of the
share screen.
visuals have kind of details to them. Is it possible to do the lights up front?
Yeah, I'll
Oh.
play on. There we go. Okay. Let me.
Cool. If you are able to put it into presentation mode,
Yeah,
that'll be easier. Slideshow to the right there.
oh, there it is.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, it was under my.
Good.
It was under my.
And I'm going to skip through a couple of these, but you can go to the second slide. And just a note this is a note for myself and a note for everybody. That most planning documents, zoning documents, including ours, uses percent slope instead of degree slope. These are very different things, which I had to relearn. So you can see, look at the 100% there. A 100% slope is only a 45-degree angle. A 30% slope comes in at 16.7 degrees.
Oh, I know.
And a 15% slope is right at that like 7 to 8 degree threshold. So even a 30% slope is pretty minimal. Now it captures 30% plus captures all of the ravines and the cliffs in town. But just to note that at that 30%, which is our threshold, it's only a 16.7 degree slope. All right, and you can go to you can kind of skip the next one. It's really just text about Waterbury steep slopes. This amounts to everything that Waterbury has to say about their steep slopes, and that's about it. That's in their zoning documents from what I could find. Now this is their map. This is the map of the village. What I wanted to point out here is that the data that they use is like, I think it's maybe 20 to 30 meter pixels on the ground. So what happens is it doesn't capture really minuscule slopes. It captures large steep slopes, not small steep slopes. So a ditch in front of someone's property, this map doesn't catch, but there major areas like Perry Hill, the mountain biking, up north across the river, it does capture those because they're very large areas of steep slopes. And then the next one is Burlington's. It's a little bit more language, but again, not a ton. And then the map after this one is Burlington's steep slopes. Their data is, I think, 15-meter resolution elevation data. So again, similar to Waterbury, it captures the along the river's edge and some steep slopes heading down towards the floodplain, and then also down towards the water. Okay, and then next is our current slope map. I think it uses LiDAR data. It's a 0.7 meter. One of the issues with this particular map is it should be classified only at 15% and above, because it's capturing that 10 to 15% at the moment, which isn't really a category that we care about. But many steep slopes throughout the city, even the very small ones. So the next one shows, it's a little bit hard to see, but it's my classification of that same data. So I got 15% or greater in orange, 30% and greater in red. Okay. Next one is all of our parcels. We have 3,065 parcels. Next one, all parcels with 15% slopes. There's 3,035. That represents 99% of all parcels in Montpelier that have any amount of 15% slopes on them. And then the next one, which I think is probably the most important slide in here, are all parcels with 30% slopes, 2,806. It represents 91.5% of all parcels could have a single pixel of under 1 meter in size because of the resolution data that we're using. Very high resolution. Oftentimes in GIS, it's important to use super high resolution data, but it's working against us in this situation because we capture ditches, we capture we actually capture building footprints because of the way the data is collected. And so people get dinged even if they're on flat land, sometimes because of the building footprint that is a man-made very small slope. All right, if we go to the next. So here's a proposal that's a 10 meter, or not a proposal. Here's a look at 10 meter slope data. Again, the orange is 15% above, 30% above in red. And what you get with that, if you go to the next slide, all right, all parcels 3,065. Next one, 15%. We've got 60.6% of parcels in the city. And then the last one here at 30%, this only captures 22.6% of parcels. So it's the large swaths of very steep slopes. So it catches the ravine behind College Street going to Sabins Pasture. It catches Cliff Street. It catches actually quite a bit of these larger areas of steep slopes, but it only represents 22.6% compared to 91 point whatever percent in our current proposal. And the last two slides, I put together a website that takes this data and overlays it. You can zoom in, zoom around. This should be publicly available to anyone. And you can really see how the data works. And if you go to the final slide, and here's a comparison with the 10 meters. So it really captures Cliff Street, as you can see, all that information. So I don't know if I have a proposal out of this, but I just wanted to note the number one thing coming out of this is that if we change the resolution of the data, or if we in this website I put together, there's also 2 layers where I maintained the LiDAR slopes, but I said anything less than 0.1 acres of that size slope gets removed. And then I did another layer that's anything less than 0.2 acres of that size gets removed. So we remove a lot of those really small areas, but we maintain the resolution of the LiDAR data for the larger areas. Anyway, that's my presentation. That's my thinking. I would love to get to a point where we are now requiring 91% of our properties to go to the DRB for 30% slope survey.
Really good, thank you. Is it like something, is that regulatory, the amount of, what do you call it?
Basically the resolution of the data.
Or is that's just how we did it? We didn't really think about it.
The map, that's maybe a mic. That map was put in place when I got hired.
Yeah, that's just we had that map. It came out available at that time. And so we used it. But remember, just because you have some 30% slope on your property doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to actually be impacting it and have. So 91% of projects do not go through DRB.
Well,
and we also can visually go through and determine, like, some 30% slopes are the roof is here and the ground is here. And so you have a 30% slope according to the map, but we obviously aren't going to be going and interpreting that as a 30% slope because your roof to the ground has been interpreted.
My question was just really, do we need to do something regulatory to say, look, we want to use this larger?
No, in fact, the purpose for us going to the map, we went with a map because what we wanted to be able to do is to eliminate people needing to hire engineers to go and do topographic studies. So when we did our original zoning, in 2018, we did everything, wetlands, all the stuff are all in the map, and we enforce to the map. So the state enforces to an idea. So anyone who's gone through the State Act 250 knows that you have to meet wetlands. We have a wetlands map, but you've got to meet wetlands that aren't on the wetlands map. So if you've got a project that you're working on in January, you're going to have to wait till spring before you can go out and check to see whether or not you've got a wetland there. We can approve all projects all year round because we have wetlands maps. If it's a mapped wetland, it's a wetland. And if it's not a mapped wetland, it's not a wetland. And so we can approve permits right throughout the winter because we don't have to wait till spring for you to show us a wetlands inventory. Same thing with steep slopes. We went through, and the unintended consequences you point out of having a very detailed slope map is that it picked up a number of things like a cellar up, a hole to get down into your cellar.
Yeah.
It captured a lot of things that you're just like, staircases that go up to a split level ranch house will get caught up as, oh, that's a steep slope. It's a flight of stairs, stop panicking. So there are a number of those types of things that are in there.
Yeah.
But that's the reason we went with the map. Now, we could choose whatever map we want, or we could choose no map and just tell everybody who's got a project, they've got to prove you don't have steep slopes.
Yeah.
That we think is worse. I think this idea is a good one. I'd actually be more curious about seeing the high level, keeping the high level resolution and knocking out 0.2 worth of because that's what we're looking at, is we want to really look at those big steep slopes. Is somebody going to go and mess with a big steep slope? Those are the ones we care about. Somebody messing with the fact that it comes across and hops up 8 feet, going up at a 40-degree slope and then levels out to another bench. Who cares what happens on that
Yeah.
slope? That there's not going to be erosion and stuff coming off that short jump.
So like what I'm picturing, for instance, let's say you have a small parcel. It's undeveloped, it has no entryway into it, but it has a ditch in front of it. After the ditch, it's a flat property, pretty flat, let's say 15% or less. That ditch is going to get caught in this data because because it's 30% or greater, and it's tiny, but it'll get caught up. Now, is that the type of thing that needs to go to DRB? Yeah, Meredith.
So we have been aware of the issues with Montpelier slopes map.
Yeah.
This whole time.
Yeah.
You know, it's because in the steep slopes provision, we have a whole clause about measuring slopes, and the second option after determine using the attached slope map is rely on other more accurate elevation and slope data available from the city or state. See the Vermont Agency
Yeah.
of Natural Resources Atlas.
Yeah.
That's actually how we've been working around it. And so something like that ditch usually isn't captured on the atlas in their slopes information.
Yeah.
You know, or but that's a big part of what we go to.
Yeah.
Because that overlay takes a slightly broader look while also not catching things like stairs and a steep roof, where
Yeah.
before you'd have to look at, it wouldn't account for that old data, that map that we have incorporated in the regulations doesn't account for, tree lines, things like that. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So that's what we've been working with. I would be very happy to have a better map.
Yeah.
Just as somebody who actually applies this all the time, that would be great.
Yeah. And I want to acknowledge that a better map means lower resolution data. In
Yeah.
the GIS world, this is my world, it is like usually exactly the opposite of what you want to do, except for when it comes to slopes, interestingly, in my opinion.
Yeah, it gets kind of crazy, the things that pop up.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out really quick, because I hadn't noticed this before. So we were talking about 50 square feet. If you look at point D, which is the measuring slopes section, it says you can exclude areas with slopes equal to or in excess of 15% that are less than 500 square feet in area, including any contiguous areas with slopes equal to or in excess of 15% on adjacent properties. So we just talked about 50 square feet. Down below, we're talking about being able to exclude 500 square feet.
Yeah, I think that the 15% is less of an issue than the 30%. And if 91.7% of our parcels are getting caught up in that 30%, I think that's more of the pain point or the issue spot.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
Thanks. I'll just add, as a layperson who reads that language that's supposed to be permissive, go somewhere else. When I hear you have to provide more accurate data than the city's 1 meter data, it's not going somewhere else and providing less accurate data. We were asked on our project to pay an engineer to go out and remap the site because something had changed since the original map that the city regulates from. So just in terms of the real world, this is what has been happening on our project. I think if you all are considering interim changes, there's a lot to be done on steep slopes potentially. It feels to me like an interim change for the year or year and a half or 2 years or whatever it takes, maybe just a year, would be use 10-meter resolution. It's more conservative, it's more granular than Waterbury by like 2.5 times, and it's more granular than Burlington. And we don't have to change anything in there except maybe to say, we're gonna use a map that uses 10-meter resolution data instead of 1-meter resolution data as an interim change. And I think you would get at what the planning director is talking about in terms of like, let's see the big slopes, let's regulate the big slopes, but smaller than that. And then you could dig in real deep and go with a different strategy and whatnot outside of the interim, but it does feel like that could be an interim change for you to consider.
So my question is, do we, sorry, James, not for
No,
you.
for me.
For a general question. Right, it's not in the regulations, right, that we have to use this map. We can, as a planning commission, just say like, let's like base our steep slopes off of the whichever map we choose. And that doesn't have to go.
It has to get adopted. It would have to get adopted as a part of the interim regulations.
It does?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep, because we adopted it into the rules. Now we can amend it when we do the interim rules. We can amend that slopes map to a different map. And that would be perfectly fine.
This is the first time that you two are hearing about that? I mean, you sound like you're aware of the, I mean, does that sound like a reasonable, does the staff have an opinion? Does that sound like a reasonable change in an interim fix?
I mean, I don't. Changing the map, whatever you want to do. You know, I don't. It would need to be something, right, that is viewable and legible on a printed piece of paper, as well as something that shows up online. So whatever it is has to be able to be printed out flat as well, because people look at it that way. But we, you know, for applying it, you know, we can zoom in. I know that.
And add things in for
R-
some projects. So
Yeah, I mean,
what
and-
we adopt is we'll adopt the map, and the map will say, this is the world. And we know those are, you saw the parcels, they're rasterized and they're square. Somebody may come in and go and say, but you can look and see that this part of this parcel, it's 15% because the center of this dot compared to the center of that dot, but it actually comes down and it's fairly flat. And where I'm building is fairly flat. So we now are in a situation where if the map says you're on a steep slope, you're on a steep slope and you're looking at the property saying, but it's flat. And so now we're in a position of, all right, now you have to provide us evidence that it's not.
So they can, but then the 1 meter map will exist somewhere still. It's still,
Yes.
You know, and that could be a resource then that,
For exclusions.
yeah, so somebody can say that somebody's coming back to find that, you know, the more detailed information in that map could back up their physical observation of being at the property.
I mean, there's access to 1 foot LiDAR information,
Yeah.
right? And we'll use that sometimes to say, okay, where's the footprint of what you're disturbing? Give us your measurements, right? Calculate the rise and run, send me photographs of the exact location you're doing this and get me that information. That's the more detailed information. It doesn't always have to be engineered to get that more detailed information.
And Aaron's who's the guy.
Oh, thanks for noticing. Yeah, Aaron?
You got that, Mike?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
No, we can.
Okay, great. So thanks for this, Tim. I really appreciate it. It's really helpful to sort of get a better understanding of how the data granularity can sort of impact just our kind of the screening function. And I think that's really helpful. But there's another thing that your presentation sort of raises to me, which I think is probably worth kind of looking into, which is, you know, I also have some experience with looking at other towns' sort of steep slope guidelines in a different context. And I noticed that a lot of other towns just sort of have kind of a threshold where they just say there'll be no development, you know, once you have a slope of, you know, whatever percentage. And here, you know, this is Montpelier, frankly, has like the zoning regulations that I haven't seen anywhere else, where you have this fairly complicated matrix that outlines like very specific sort of categories of slope, you know, 15 to 20, 20 to 25, you know, 30 plus. And then you have, and that's cross-referenced with, the amount of disturbance, like whether that triggers a hearing and, whether that triggers an engineering report and all that sort of stuff. And I guess and this sort of goes back to what I think Gabe was talking about even in our last meeting, which is, we're not engineers, like we don't have a good sense of what the underlying rationale for those sort of thresholds are. And so I just have a question to, kind of staff more broadly, which is, is there, I still don't understand what the underlying drivers of that matrix is, like why those numbers were the way they are. And I guess I'm tempted to, at least in the interim, maybe try to default to a more globally applied threshold, like a bright line that just says, like slopes over 25% will trigger a DRB hearing, used in conjunction with like 10-meter granular data. I don't, if there's an appetite for the group for something like that, because it just, to me, I still, the matrix for the steep slope stuff still doesn't, is kind of a black box to me, and I still don't understand it. So, sorry that's long-winded, but the question to the staff is like, why is the matrix the way that it is? Do we have any information about that? And B, more broadly to the commission, is there an appetite to move to a more simplified approach, at least in the interim, to just say, let's find a threshold, just percentage number that triggers a DRB hearing potentially in conjunction with sort of greater, less granular data.
All right, so I'll answer the first question on, I don't think it needs to be this granular. So a little bit of the background. I mean, we talk about safety and slopes. So if you were to go and open up the Soil Conservation Service, the old SCS data, and we start talking about, where slopes and soil types remain stable, they usually remain stable up to about 10 to 15%, depending on, is it a sandy soil, is it a clay soil? So there's a break line in there, and 10 to 15%. So usually after 15%, we start being concerned, soil scientists start being concerned about how much vegetation, because there are a couple of things. If it's just bare sand, it's just going to erode, but you put trees on it and it stays put. So we start being concerned from a development standpoint, depending on whether these steep slopes are being cleared and what work is being done on it and what's being done to reinforce them and keep them in place. So usually that's where those lower levels of 15% come in. And usually as you start to hit 30% and higher, that's where a lot of the soil services say that is like, you clear a 30% slope, you're going to have erosion. If you're, I mean, unless it's got big rock in it, unless it's got some bedrock in there that's holding it in place, you want to keep all of those areas having soil, having vegetation to keep it in place. Usually trees, as it's getting steeper, you usually want more trees than you want grass. So that's a little bit of the background, but I think this was overdone. This was another product of the previous of the consultant that we had. We did a lot of work to clean this up, but it still remained a lot. There's a lot there, and it doesn't need to be broken 15, 20, 25, 30. We could really have a 15 and a 30 or a 15 and a 25, and I think we would be fine. They used to be all over the place. They didn't match up. We matched them up. So now if you look, the engineered requirements are exactly half of the hearing requirements. So if you hit 4,000 square feet of disturbed slope, then you're going to need an engineering plan. And again, the point is, if you're going to start clearing 4,000 square feet, how are you going to keep that in place? Is it going to be revegetated? Are you putting up some type of retaining wall? Are you going to have ditching? What's your plan for not having this happen? And I guess the follow-up, this was all done in 2017, 2018. The best follow-up I would have is looking at a lot of what happened in Berry City during the recent floods. It was not necessarily, most of the buyouts are buildings that were going downhill due to erosion and building movement. They didn't have proper foundations under them based on the soil type. So we were trying to not knowing that, but knowing that now, that's kind of a little example of that's what we're trying to look at. If you're going to be on a 15% slope, we're going to start looking at, okay, what are the foundations looking like? Because we want everything to stay put in the event of these rain events. But yes, the granularity of 15, 20, 25, 30, way overkill. We can very much go down to, a 15% and a 30% and really capture most of what we're looking at, which is development under 15%, build away. 15 to 30, we want to take a look at it and see what it's going to do. Over 30, we really want to take a look at it. And in 2018, it used to say over 30, you can't do anything. And that really got us into a bind. And so we had to kind of roll that one back. So I still think over 30, we can allow development. It's just a matter of, it depends. We've had some that we really wanted to make sure because they were on, I think of North Street, somebody building a house on North Street and their backyard just drops off.
Sure.
One on College Street, the back of College Street, up near Marvin. You put something on the back there, you're just looking over the edge saying, all right, I want to make sure this foundation is going to be here in 50 years and not down in that guy's backyard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of just being aware of the time crunch we're in, of just if somebody wants to move the map idea, and then I think there's just a lot to discuss for larger changes, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, I will move that we change to the 10-meter slopes granularity.
Using the 10-meter resolution.
Yes, right, resolution on the map.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. And Aaron, did you still have a comment, or is your hand just stuck? Oh, he's muted.
Well, that's,
Oh, I don't,
Automatically. Yeah.
okay.
oh, sorry, Mike, were you just trying to unmute him at the same time I was? I don't know. I tried to.
Okay, sorry. I hope we didn't move too fast for you, Aaron. I just wanted to.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Sorry. You guys I have to get permission every time to talk, which is probably a good thing, but I have a question for Tim actually before we vote, if that's okay, which is if we switch to 10-meter data at 10, so that if we have data with 10-meter granularity, what is the square foot area that a sort of pixel that gets picked up? What would that represent? Is that a 10 meter by 10 meters square?
It is.
So that's 30 by 30 roughly. I'm just trying to, that's like, so it's like 1,000 square feet basically? Or no, no, my math is wrong.
It'll be close to 1,000 square feet.
It'd be close to 1,000 square feet. Okay. I'm just trying to think of like what that granularity would show relative to what we have in that matrix right now, where it's like 2,000 square foot disturbance.
Sure.
Because my thinking is this is like 15% slope, a PE stamped engineering plan like takes care of those concerns. Like once we get out into like the 25 to 30%, range, maybe we start looking at something with the DRB. But it's good to know that like, what are we looking at when we start picking up the parcels? Like how much slope is there on a parcel if it gets picked up with a 10-meter granularity?
Yeah. Let me just say one additional thing. The slope is made when you have one pixel next to another pixel. So one pixel is 100 feet elevation. The next pixel next to it is 50 feet elevation. The slope is then calculated between those two pixels. So it's basically 30 square feet on the ground next to 30 square feet on the ground. So it's kind of averaging out the slope across those two pixel areas. So in very steep areas that are very large steep areas, it's captured by that. It's really good at capturing that. What it doesn't capture is a very small ditch, a little boulder, a well, whatever it is on your property. It doesn't catch that, which I think is a good thing.
So I think one of the advantages this will go, and then we can move on to something, we'll keep moving, is that if we adopt it into the interim, because we're going to be working this over the next year, Meredith can use this once it's adopted into the interim, we can use it for 6-9 months. And as we get to our permanent fix, we can come back and say, this worked,
Sure.
this didn't work, or here's how we can tweak this to work a little better.
Sure.
But
The other thing is if we're changing the map and not worrying about the text within the provisions, if that's what you go for, it updates both the erosion control standards at 3008 and the steep slopes, because the erosion control triggers for professional erosion control engineered plans are based on that map as well.
and a lot of those get captured. There are some state requirements as well. that-
Yeah, there's some state
So,
requirements, but I'm just, yeah,
ours-
there's standard erosion control practices that are required for anything that disturbs soil. But the triggers for a engineered erosion control plan or a professional erosion control plan come in when we look at the slopes on that map.
But we'll still be citing Waterbury.
But so your map looked at that we're gonna get from you just has 15 and 30.
It has 15 to 30 and 30 and above.
15 to 30 and 30 and above. So we'll just qualify that right now. As we put this in just by unanimous consent, that also is going to amend figures 308 and 309 to not have those classifications as well, because we're no longer going to have a map for them.
Oh, okay.
The thresholds could be,
And 310.
the thresholds could be set to whatever you want with the 10-meter map. We were talking about 15 and 30, so those are the numbers that I happen to use for
Yep.
this presentation.
Okay, if we wanted to go to less,
Happy to have two categories.
yeah, I'm just thinking if we're doing the 30 by 30 squares, I'm thinking we're gonna end up with one square that's 30, one square that's 25, one square that's 25, one square that's 20, one square that two or three squares 15, one back to 30.
Yeah.
So I think if we're going less, then I would generalize those categories as well.
Yeah. So go with that 0 to 15, 15 to 30, 30 and above.
Sound good, Meredith?
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, 15% to 30% is about a 7-degree difference. Not huge.
And then one point on the erosion control is that the matrix for that is based on the 25, goes up to 25%.
Yep.
So that would we?
We
switch
would
that?
probably bump that to 30.
Okay, great.
Would it, good catch on that.
Okay, so do we need to do anything procedurally? I got, or we?
Can I ask one question?
Mhm.
Just curious, maybe there's a good answer for this, but I don't think I've heard anyone say that they're concerned about slopes from the 15% to the 30%. We're talking about slopes that are 8 to 16 degrees. And I think that is one of the things that we saw when we looked at the other towns is we define our steep slopes as anything greater than 15%, which is like a 8 or 9 degree slope. I mean, that's like that. You might just say, we want our steep slopes to regulate our steep slopes, which are greater than 30%. And we want to focus on those. Food for thought.
Okay, I mean, if somebody wants to move, I'm getting a lot of information in my head, so
I think there's a big difference in hearing thresholds and disturbance and clearing limits that are set in here. There's a big difference between 15% and 30%. 30% really is that all. It's not like 8,000 square feet or more of this land is disturbed, which is actually quite a bit of disturbance on land, which is captured in that 15%. But anyway, what I'm trying to say is I'm feeling comfortable with the amount of interim changes that we're currently making.
I mean, going back to the difficulty of having to go to the DRB, and I think we heard that repeatedly, is that it just takes a lot of time for them to prepare for these hearings. And then, letting your neighbors weigh in. And then also, I think Jocelyn, I forget what her last name is, at our, yes, at our public hearing mentioned that just the standing laws are so generous. I would almost want to edit this, because to me, this topic is entirely engineering. I'm an engineer. So I see this as an engineering question that needs to be solved. Perhaps it's limited to, limiting the public hearing process to just people who will be physically affected by a steep slope being disturbed. So it's not about creating a harmonious transition between, there's like all these qualitative words that come in under the design standards when I see this as an engineering problem. If it's safe, is the slope stable? Those can be signed off on by a licensed engineer. And of course, if someone is being if their property is going to be physically affected by that slope instability, they should maybe have a voice. But allowing anyone nearby to come in and start weighing in on distinctive natural features, I think, is a barrier to construction. And maybe a needless barrier to construction if we can already certify that it will be safe and it will be stable. So
I agree. I think that this section, we could do a deeper dive to.
Yeah.
But as an interim, I think that this pulls a lot of stuff potentially out of the
Yeah.
DRB, which is your goal.
Right. And I think this
and-
might be a longer term discussion, but
Yeah.
just kind of like,
Yeah, but as interim changes, I think that so far these things I feel good about where we are now, but not done.
right. That's right. I kind of want to tee it up, because to me, it's just like,
Yeah.
why are people allowed?
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we should.
fair enough.
Tee it up.
Fair enough.
Can I ask you a quick question of Meredith in terms of the process? So when you're doing an administrative review of a steep slopes issue and you're just doing the administrative review, are there any public notice requirements so that neighbors would be conscious? So there's none. Okay.
No.
So
No, there's
only,
nothing-
I'm sorry, just so the only public notice requirements would be is if it triggers the DRB hearing.
Right, so all administrative zoning permits, none of them have pre-permit issuance notice requirements. Once the permit has been issued, there's a notice that gets posted on the property for the project during the 15-day appeal period. And, we post the permits as we're required to in the city, but individual neighbors do not get mailed notices like they do ahead of a development review board hearing.
Okay. Thank you. That's helpful.
Mike has about 6 more minutes here.
I know, I don't know what we can,
Got about 5 minutes.
what we should try to do in these last 5 minutes.
I mean, we've been, I think, working towards a resolution with the 10-meter map. I think it would be-
I feel like the rest of this is actually everything we already asked for, so it should be straightforward.
Okay.
We can-
Okay,
Oh, you're referring to what's left with the site plan.
Yes.
Yeah, the site plan 320, that was a pretty straightforward. 6,000, more than 6 dwelling units, so it went from 2 to 6. And we put the clarifier if the development includes one or more of these, which hadn't been included in the past, which was always assumed that it's one of these, but this now makes it clear.
well, does somebody want to move the changes as represented in the strikeout copy, or is there more to discuss?
I would just, I only have one, not about any of the substance, just the wording on page 398, firefighting facilities, applicants shall design, all subdivisions shall provide. I think there's just an extra shall. Maybe not that extra shall needs to come out. Applicants shall design all subdivisions to
provide.
provide. Yeah, the
Yep.
2 is
Good.
crossed out is
Good catch.
So that's the only thing I saw personally.
All right. And I will assume that when this gets voted, you guys vote this, that it also included the other changes that we had for the steep slopes, which was just to add in that the 50 square feet.
Yeah.
So
It's
I move
also,
that we accept it with the 10,000, what is it? What's the
10
resolution?
meter
10-meter
resolution.
resolution. With, and the other
and the other,
And
and the other
change-
amendments.
change the matrix
adjustment.
and that.
Okay,
All right, I'll second that motion.
okay, okay, we'll get Sean second, okay. All those in favor?
Hi.
Aye.
Okay.
It's Mike Bernard.
Yeah. I guess, I mean, we could approve these minutes.
But did we want to get to the housing committee?
Yeah, I guess
Memo
maybe
while we've
before,
got a
before
quick-
you leave, if any planning commissioners have questions on Mike's memo or comments.
And it was already sent, right, Mike?
Yes, this was sent back in April. It was a request from council. They wanted to have some information, so I replied to them. Basically to answer a couple questions, including the issue of what happened to the contents of the memo. And I took the time to lay out which were the pieces that were added in, which weren't. And again,
I mean, it was already, my comment is just this, it was already sent, it was requested by the mayor. If it come through us, if it was from us, I probably would have changed things in there somewhat. I think all of us are, wish that all the people hadn't resigned that have worked hard. There were a lot of good ideas. Some of them cost money. Some of them are things we don't know about. They're just things that need investigation. And based on the timeline, we didn't, and I hope they'll reconsider. I hope they'll get involved. Like, we want their input. We want to look at all those things is all I would say. But in terms of the actual memo, Mike, I mean, that's your product. And so I don't have any comments other than that.
I was curious, there's a section where, I forget where it is now, but that the planning department had gone to the housing committee to explain,
Mhm.
To seek input. And I think just, it would have been helpful to like know when that happened, just to. That, I think it's like the passive voice is even used, but just saying, that they were consulted on these dates.
yeah, we met
Would've
with
been
them
helpful.
after the March 25th. So we met and had our public input on March 25th for the
Mhm.
housing chapter.
Yeah,
We also had a bunch of changes that were made. So I know we met with them we went through and incorporated those changes that had been sent to us. And then I went back and met with them. So
yeah,
it would have been September, October. But it wouldn't have been the first time we had met. Josh
right,
was the primary person for meeting with them, so he was a
Okay.
conduit for a lot of the information,
yeah.
and certainly my requests to Josh, and he acknowledged that he may not have been clear on all of those, that we were looking for input.
Right, exactly.
We're moving towards the finish line.
Yeah.
And the housing committee keeps saying they're working on changes, and we're like, I need the changes. We're heading towards the finish line if you've got recommendations. And so that was, as we said, and I think we had mentioned it when it first came in, it was the date of the public hearing that we got the input, and it wasn't in the format. Again, all the other committees that had sent me things were all in the same format, or they were strikeouts or lineouts, or they were very easy to incorporate for us to put into a matrix. This was their memo that they sent us before the public hearing was not in any format or context that would let us easily be able to integrate those. And so we plucked out the pieces that we could to go through and say, this is a zoning change, we have zoning, this is this, we've got this. So. Yeah, and I see Peter's got his hand up, so.
Great, Peter, you want to go ahead?
I'd just like to make 3 points about this. But by the way, I was on the housing task force when this whole city plan started. And I've been following it very closely. I've seen and read very carefully all the interim versions of it. I just say that as an explanation that I'm not just somebody who's shooting off his mouth. I think I have 3 issues. One is, now what? Because Gabe, I'm sorry, but those people are not going to come back. They're just not going to come back. They were burned. Secondly, this is not the only committee, as Steve Whitaker said, this is not the only committee that feels that they really weren't genuinely involved. Third, I was the one who pushed Mike and Josh to go to the housing committee and try to get their input, because I was at the meeting in May when there was nobody there from the housing committee. And I asked a couple of people I knew in the housing committee, and they said they weren't really aware of what was going on. And through the entire summer, it was on the agenda, and I asked Josh, could I come and speak to it, not just in the 2 minutes that is ordinarily allowed, since I've studied this housing chapter from the very beginning. He said he'd get back to me. He never did. My point is, rather than there's a he said, she said situation, or he said, there was never a genuine effort to work with them to make sure that they had it in the right format, et cetera, et cetera. They had big ideas, they had little ideas, they had a whole variety of things. Neither Josh nor Mike worked with them to make sure that they would get it. And I'll just add one more thing. When we proposed to get rid of the housing task force for a whole variety of very good reasons, and to replace it with a city council appointed housing committee, Mike publicly opposed that because the housing task force was a very conflicted body, and an independent city council appointed committee should have been more important. But Mike and Josh constantly squeezed them to only do what they wanted them to do. So this explanation, beside this defensiveness, is not entirely accurate. Thank you.
I think that one of the things that Peter said in the beginning is what's next, and I think that I would like to be forward-looking here, and I really like the information that they sent along to us. I look forward to, in the future, being able to amend our dynamic city plan when it gets approved. And I'll also add to that the Parks Commission work that came in from Alec. That also came in on April 14th. And there's a lot of good information in there as well. So I would say that with this dynamic city plan that once it gets approved, I think that we should spend time with the really pithy and really good information that both these commissions have provided.
Yeah, and in the vein of looking forward to what's next, knowing that we're coming back to the city plan in the near future, that whatever chapter we are going to do, assign at least one of us to go to the next meeting of the pertinent committee. I know that, that's adding one more meeting is not on anybody's wish list, but I think that that's a lesson to be learned.
I think that's a great idea, Sean.
Because we gotta, at the same time, we go out there to bring them back, because I would have loved more people from other committees to have shown up during this process. So yeah, we go out there to go get them and bring them back here.
Okay, anything more on this topic, or should we just maybe approve the minutes and wrap up? Let's see.
Could I make one comment?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I think
Up to the microphone for the minute.
it's gonna be
Secretary can get it.
super short. I was just gonna say, it would have been so easy for you all to say, we're gonna update the zoning, and it's gonna take a year. And you all chose to focus on what interim changes you could make that might move the needle now, and I really appreciate it. I think it's the hard work. It's the details, and I'm up here often critical. I really appreciate you all digging in and doing what you can and looking at those bigger changes over time, but thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for your input and your positive vibes. As well. All right, April 28th. And what's the other minutes, May 13th. We could move them both together if no one has any changes.
April 28th is kind of odd in the general business section. It first says that there's no members of the public with comments, but then it says C. Whitaker spoke about.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I was wondering, I don't know if we want to consider the summary of the open meeting violation or Aaron, because I feel like Aaron really
Mm.
took the lead on that, and I want to make sure it's represented correctly. So maybe I don't know if it's worth just
We need to get Leah's minutes on this one. She is the one who always takes the detailed.
Leah, right? Yeah, she's so maybe
notes.
I hate to postpone it, but maybe we.
I know, I also think the description is not what I remember.
Yeah, about the open meeting violation. Yeah, because I feel
Yeah.
like there was more to it.
No, Aaron has thoughts.
Yeah, look, let's just table it. I can put a little
Okay.
more, I can put a little more meat on that.
That
on
would be
line
great.
Item.
Thank
So,
you.
Yeah, sorry, I should have done it before the meeting, but I'm
Well,
just looking at it now for the first time, so.
Okay, I think the May 13th meeting or minutes seem okay to me, though, if anyone wants to move those.
We'll move the approval of May 13th minutes.
Okay. Want a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye.
Hey,
Great. Anyone want to move to adjourn?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Thanks, everyone.